I'm Tom Nagorski, Executive Vice President of the Asia Society. We welcome you, wherever you may be watching, to our global online platform and to this special program with His Excellency, the Secretary for Foreign Affairs from the Philippines. Before we get started, just a couple of very quick notes about upcoming events at the Asia Society. For our policy-minded audience, this Thursday, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, New York time, we feature a program about U.S. policy towards Iran, under the heading Between War and Peace, with leaders from the Asia Society Policy Institute. That's 2 p.m. on Thursday. And throughout this week and next, several programs held in conjunction with the opening of our landmark show, postponed once, but now it's on this fall, the Asia Society Triennial, which actually opens in person tomorrow here in New York. 40 Asian artists, contemporary artists, many of the works commissioned for the Triennial. Our first in-person event that we've had here since the lockdown began back in March. Tickets are limited, but they are free. You just need to register so that we can control crowds and do it all safely. The Triennial is already generating rave reviews in the art community. And if you cannot make it to our New York galleries, as I say, there are many related events and an Instagram Live virtual tour with the co-curators of the Triennial this Friday. And for the very latest on these and all of our online programs, we invite you, as always, to visit asiasociety.org. Now to today's special guest, Teodoro Locsin, Teddy Locsin, as he is commonly known, has held the position of Foreign Secretary in the Philippines for the last 2 years. 2 years this month, I believe. He served previously as his country's permanent representative to the United Nations. He has been both a journalist and a lawyer, graduate of Harvard Law School, and in government he has served as legal counsel and a speechwriter to 3 Philippine presidents. He has served also in the Philippine House of Representatives for the better part of a decade. Secretary Locsin joined us in person at the Asia Society a year ago during the UN General Assembly sessions, September 2019. Tonight, he's actually the last speaker in our series held in tandem with the 2020 UN General Assembly, which of course went virtual this year. And those sessions actually finished some weeks ago, but we have taken the opportunity over these recent days and weeks to hear from the leaders of Asia, as we always do whenever the opportunity arises. The Secretary will deliver some remarks. I'll ask a few questions. And then we'll take some of your questions. As always, members of the audience, you can post any questions you may have using the chat and comment functions on YouTube and Facebook, where we are streaming this conversation. Secretary Locsin, it is great to see you again. We wish, of course, it could be in person. Certainly, we hope that around this time next year, assuming you are still in your current position, that you'll grace us with your presence here in New York again. But for now, Secretary Locsin, again, thank you for joining us. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I timed this 15 minutes flat.
Okay.
Ambassador Josette M. Sheeran, President, CEO of the Asia Society, the Honorable Kevin Rudd, President of the Asia Society Policy Institute, Mr. Tom Nagorski, Executive Vice President of the Society, esteemed guests, good morning from Manila. The annual talk at the Asia Society is a cherished hope and tradition during the UNGA High-Level Week. Last year, I enjoyed that privilege and had lots of fun. I was looking forward to the same this year. Instead, you invited my president. He must have seen my pleading look because he passed it on to me. Thanks, but it won't be the same. I miss New York, and I can't depend on media telling how things are really going in my city. The dry humor is still there. Andrew Cuomo asking, what's this with the mask pulled down? A chin guard? Let me inflict a little Camus on you. How could we, have given a thought to anything like plague, which rules out any future, cancels journeys, silences the exchange of views? But then there's Zoom. It works. You can pretend to listen while multitasking. It worked so well, I announced I'd cut the budget for travel. The groans in the department came as though from the first circle of hell. I used to be the Secretary of Foreign Affairs, but since COVID, I've become the Secretary of Repatriations of jobless overseas Filipinos, as well as of expatriations. We took it on ourselves to sweep up stranded foreigners. The Secretary of Tourism rolled up her sleeves, game to help the tourists get out, even if it shrunk her jurisdiction. I was told this was crazy until foreign governments started heaping praises. The pandemic is said to have caused the retreat of states into themselves. In the race for a vaccine, it has been a game of to each his own and of money trumps solidarity. Well, that's not how I've seen it. Here in ASEAN, the first reaction was, whatever it is, it's all over the place. We gotta help each other lick this thing wherever we find it. If we focus each on ourselves, the virus will be back with us. Leave no one behind or he'll turn up among us infected. Everyone safe or no one. Other countries and powers followed. One advanced country after another announced progress in finding the vaccine, and at the same time, committing to make it a public good. Did you notice that? It's a good world after all. I warned that the vaccine is a reverse weapon of mass destruction. If not delivered but withheld, people will die in droves. If denied or delayed to any country, the UN and multilateralism are finished. The virus can strike a country, debilitate its population, devastate its economy, but it cannot finish it off. It will survive to give vent to its fully justified hate in ways worse than we have seen. This time, it will be personal and not just ideological. 8 months into this crisis, the world is nowhere near a solution. Rather, the world has entered a second wave. Yet, it is not for want of trying. Sure, in the West, many won't submit to restrictions. Gotta admire the spirit of freedom at great personal risk. And when they're stricken, and when they sicken, they don't blame anyone except maybe China. But the reckless disregard of others' safety, I don't know what to make of it. In his address before the UN General Assembly, President Duterte made it clear how we address COVID-19 will define our future. For the Philippines, he said, that means putting people at the core of our global response. Hence his priorities: save lives, halt the contagion, keep the economy afloat, let it sink a bit to spare more lives, and reach out to countries developing vaccines. From the outset, President Duterte took decisive action, imposing the longest, strictest lockdown anywhere, with interventions defined by responsiveness and quick adaptability to a varying new normal. He set up an interagency task force, of which I'm a member. It got the usual complaints. The rules keep changing, no consistency. Call that a plan? They sounded like New Yorkers. But that is because the task force meets daily and reacts promptly to new data. It's been with us like everywhere else, except South Korea. Boy, those people are really smart. We're making things up as we go along. And when something works long enough, we call it a work in progress. The only plans that don't change are memorial plans, but you still get to pick the tombstone. By and large, the public cooperated. The fear factor kicked in and increasingly entrenched itself. The economy took a beating, so we relaxed a bit, but people still stayed home. At best, they braved exposure to earn a living. Commerce was in ICU. Healthcare is an issue, immune to political misunderstanding and misinterpretation, unless the plan is to wipe them out by letting the disease take its course. But herd immunity was never in the cards for the president. Now, liberals will tell you that's because the herd elected him. That's why liberals never win. For him, the overriding aim is to save lives. He won't hear the alternatives. And the herd responded. In the latest survey, he got 91% approval rating. The liberal opposition dropped into a depression as the economy plunged into recession. But strong economic fundamentals and sufficient fiscal space, generated by 3 administrations, including the present, put us in a strong position to take the beating. The pandemic inadvertently hastened our shift to a digital economy. That is regarded as good. The slogan is, we'll build back better. I don't believe it. We will never build as well as we were complaining about, like needing scores of workers for tasks cheaper and faster done by a few computers and self-driven machines. The bad old days gave us more jobs and more prosperity that I can imagine recovering anytime soon, if ever. That's why, minus the pandemic, we'd never have gone so far digital as we have, just to keep going. The song's right. Things will never be as good as the way they were. It is no secret. Our economy runs in large part on Filipino migrant workers' remittances, some 10 million of them. Their contributions are why we survived the Mexican debt crisis, the Asian crisis, and the global financial crisis when Wall Street held up the world, and now the pandemic. But migrant workers are among the worst hit by it. Our seafarers, who make up 30% of global maritime labor, found themselves dead in the water in empty cruise ships or laid off as cargo shipping dropped. The president has been bringing them home, 200,000. Another 100,000 still out there. We want them home for Christmas. Our health workers have suffered. For many countries, they are indispensable, reputed for their expertise, efficiency, compassion, and genuine care for patients. In the US alone, there are 156,000 Filipino nurses and doctors. In the UK, tens of thousands. Her Majesty awarded one to honor them all. We have asked host countries not to exclude them from the COVID-19 safety nets, and they have responded well. It's a good world after all. Only science can take us out of this darkness. Votive candles don't have the candle power, but prayer without the frills helps. At the UN, President Duterte said, when the world finds that vaccine, it should be made available to all rich and poor nations alike. It must be considered a global public good. Universal access is imperative and not conditioned on requiring any people, class, or country to submit to another's will as the price of cure. That's the only decent thing to do. To ASEAN, I said cures and vaccines will come from outside. Russia, China, the US, the UK, not from within the region. So focus on building up capacity to make and distribute when they're ready. Preparing for future pandemics is good to keep in mind, but until this one is licked, let's stick to that. When I spoke with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo in August, I told him that the president's highest priority is ensuring access to a safe and effective vaccine once available. He said, right. A few hours later, my ambassador in Washington called that Pfizer Moderna got in touch. I'm in talks with AstraZeneca. In Yunnan last week, Wang Yi said to me that President Xi is as good for his word. The Philippines has priority of priorities. It's almost ready. A former Congress colleague of mine has taken it. We're all watching him for adverse effects, but he's a congressman and therefore indestructible, except for me. My doctor says I'm too old and not to risk it. What happened to the most vulnerable first? I thought the rush was to save my age group. What are we now, Eskimos? We've increasingly been asked, where do we stand in the Thucydides trap? True, no country more than the Philippines feels the significant impact of the rivalry between the two superpowers, the US being its only defense treaty ally, and China its biggest neighbor and top economic partner, with the US second. Great. I echo my remarks at Asia Society last year. An independent foreign policy means getting off your knees and on your feet and standing up for your country and never be used by others to fight their quarrels. The end of that is always you as everyone's enemy and you hanging from a limb with one hand while holding an empty bag with the other. That is the prospect the Philippines seeks to avoid in all the Western anxiety over the South China Sea. Our independent foreign policy applies to all and certainly to China as well. The president steadfastly steered Philippines-China relations along two tracks. The track of good relations to realize the manifold promise of economic cooperation with a rising China, and the track of firm, unshirking resolve to protect every inch of our sovereignty and sovereign rights under the UNCLOS, as clarified and affirmed by the 2016 Arbitral Award. At the UN, The President affirmed that the arbitral award is now part of international law, beyond compromise and beyond the reach of passing administrations to dilute, diminish, or abandon. And he firmly rejected attempts to undermine it. The Philippines depends on one thing only, OK2, itself and international law, of which UNCLOS and the 2016 arbitral award are a part. The Philippines won the award with zero help from anybody and with great hindrance from most. It welcomes international support for the award, better late than never. But in no way does the Philippines acknowledge that support as adding an iota to the legal stature of the award. That said, I think all the protagonists in the South China Sea share our steadfast commitment to peace and stability, especially in this pandemic, which alone is more than any or all of us can handle. In that August phone call, I thank Secretary Pompeo for his statements, affirming support for Southeast Asian coastal states' maritime claims, in our case, outright rights in the South China Sea. I appreciated the United States articulation of the 2016 arbitral award as final and binding, its call for compliance, and its recognition of the award as authoritative interpretation of UNCLOS. There is a great leap over the period of a year. I recall that in my remarks last year, I observed that the US position is always shy of supporting the arbitral award by insisting only on unrestricted freedom of navigation. The United States is essential to maintaining stability in the Asia Pacific. It is the only hegemon in history who can be trusted to do the job without ulterior motive other than keeping its lead to do the job. A power imperial in its scale without an iota of empire in its mind. Notably, when we put a break to the abrogation of the Philippines-US Visiting Forces Agreement, it was welcomed, not only by the US government and the private sector, but by all the protagonists in the South China Sea without exception. This is recognition that the presence of US forces by VFA or another arrangement is key to keeping stability in the region, even for those, to borrow from Snow, borrowing from Pascal, on the other side of the river. At the ASEAN-US Post-Ministerial Conference, I listened with great interest and increasing confidence in our safety and sovereignty to Secretary Pompeo lay out the US strategy to keep the peace through a powerful and permanent, no longer intermittent presence in Southeast Asia. Ernest Hemingway's advice for effective writing is to show it, not tell it. Talks cheap, action commits. Works in diplomacy as well. To be sure, this strategy raises tensions, and that's unnerving. But even worse than unnerving is losing your nerve, because out of a misplaced complacency, we end up getting a wake-up call from the interloper himself already in your living room, helping himself to the bar and asking if you have peanuts to go with the drink. That's when the tension becomes so unbearable, it results in either of two things. Either giving the interloper the keys to the house or trying to throw him out, which is sure to be hard going. That is because no one self-respecting, however small and seemingly weak, will ever give up what is essential to its being, territory. Because territory is the body of a nation, even as courage is its soul. No courage, no soul. In saying this, I mark out no power in particular, but anyone, even among us in ASEAN, who takes what is ours and, because of our treaty, what is yours. Each of us must stand firm and uncompromising in our national interests, in the firm and well-warranted belief that none will care for another's interest until the latter shows it can take care of itself. We can agree to disagree on that score, but we all agree that there is no other way but to settle the score. Despite COVID-19, and perhaps even because of COVID-19, China's ascendancy is beyond cavil, not just in Asia Pacific, but worldwide. Graham Allison has added to the Thucydides trap a report that China is now the #1 economy in the world. I said that here last year, and I say it again. China has done more by its economies of scale to democratize consumption worldwide with products that would otherwise be limited to a better few, to the better off few. As Dave Chappelle quit, take the jobs back home. You want to pay $9,800 for an iPhone? China is accused of imperialist ambition, as evidenced by the Belt and Road Initiative. But in Brussels, I said that if European imperialism had adopted the methods of so-called Chinese imperialism by throwing huge development projects at its prey, European empires would still be around. The question remains the same. Do we allow the reefs, with the conflicts they generate, to get in the way of eating of that buffet? The answer is a quiet but firm no. We're finding ways to keep our cake and have the other one too. That said, Gandhi said, consistency is the bugbear of small minds. Some of my views, and perhaps the very angle from which those views come, may change after I finish reading General McMaster's Battlegrounds, the Fight to Defend the Free World. I had the honor to meet and listen to him in the White House. He is arguably the best military mind since Harry Summers on strategy, both equally lucid and crystal in their presentations. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Secretary. You are certainly as lucid and candid a speaker as I think we have on this platform, certainly in terms of public officials, and we appreciate that candor. I must say, I also appreciate, I know that you are the first leader we have ever had who has quoted Camus, Hemingway, and Dave Chappelle. So that's, we appreciate just the range you've given us. I was going to start actually with some questions about the pandemic where you began, but maybe it's best just because you've put so much on the plate and left us with, as you say, the having your cake and eating it too in terms of the China relationship. Maybe while that's fresh, we keep it there for a moment. I was struck already by the president's remarks in terms of what seems to be this balance that you have now articulated in your own way, sir, of the as you described, the track of good relations on the economy. And then I think you said firm, unshirking resolve in terms of the territorial issues in the South China Sea. And so you speak about the need to settle the score in the South China Sea, but then you also have words of praise for China on the economy. Your president, on the one hand, spoke at the UN or to the UN General Assembly about the arbitral award as having been, quote, a triumph of reason over rashness, of law over disorder, of amity over ambition. But then in his, I think it was his State of the Nation address, just a bit prior to that, seemed to be almost resigned to the fact that the territorial advances by China had been made. One more quote, he said, China is claiming it, we are claiming it, China has the arms, we do not have it, it's as simple as that. So I guess my question, sir, is beyond the very strong rhetoric that you and your president have made vis-a-vis the South China Sea, what is behind that rhetoric in terms of actions by your country, or by, or what are you asking for from ASEAN or the broader regional and global community to back those up?
One is we're asking nothing from ASEAN. I'd rather depend on ourselves. Each country in ASEAN plays the Chinese card one way or the other, and that changes too. The president comes from this direction. It's not exactly mine. One is he's from the south, from Mindanao, where we've had some of our biggest wars of secession, and he knows what war is like, and he doesn't like the idea of war. He thinks, people getting hurt. That really disturbs him. I guess that they say that's because he has a direct relationship with his constituents as a mayor. He doesn't like to see them shot. We went through the Sparrow units, which are communist assassination squads. I was there that time. And then we went through the two Muslim secessions. So he's averse to saying things like, let's just go to war. I rather have a tendency to do that more often. But when it comes to objecting to every incursion that as we see it, that China has made, we have fired diplomatic protests. When I was in the UN, I used to say firing diplomatic protests is like throwing paper at a brick wall. But I was told, no, don't be like that. It has a significance in international law. Once you let one infraction pass, then it establishes a bad precedent, which gives the world an excuse to yield you to the stronger and richer powers. So don't give them an excuse. And that's why we have started to build up our, not exactly our blue water navy, but we have enough corvettes. We are swarming their areas because that's the Chinese strategy, to swarm the areas also with their fishing boats. And my strategy, together with some of my colleagues in Southeast Asia, is you swarm with our vessels all over the place, and the likelihood of an accident happening, a collision, an allision, or whatever, increases tremendously. And in our case, you hit one of our military vessels, and that, I believe, is a trigger for the Mutual Defense Treaty. And sometimes I've gone on the record to say, sink one of ours, that violates the Mutual Defense Treaty, and I guess that's World War III. This has also alarmed the Americans for my saying that, but that is what the Mutual Defense Treaty says. And I'm so happy to have Mike Pompeo there as Secretary of State, because he says the same thing. So that's how we're doing it now. No concessions. We allow no infraction to go unanswered, and then we just try to see if we can also cooperate on other fields, such as the fact that China is the rising economy in the world. There are two economies actually that are very important to most of the developing countries, and that's the Chinese and the American. They're both gigantic. They're both a bit rough and tumble, but other great economies, perhaps in the West, they are so far advanced, they really don't need us. They don't need our exports. They don't need our. So it's these two countries that matter the most to us. And now we find they're at odds with each other. When I was in Asia Society, remember I said, I have this lingering fear of a China-US rapprochement, reminding me of what Lee Kuan Yew said. When two elephants fight, there goes the grass. But when two elephants make love, well, there goes the forest. I've been worried about that prospect. The last one.
We do remember, sir, very well. I was actually going to ask you a question, and I will maybe come back to it because it's a memorable line. So thank you for, particularly for sharing with the audience who may not have been with us a year ago. But if I can ask just one more follow-up question back to the South China Sea, in terms of actual actions beyond the words. Again, help our audience to reconcile a couple of things we've heard, and maybe we don't have the news on this side of the world as cleanly and clearly as we should, but the president has said, I believe, that there would be no Philippine Navy exercises, naval exercises with the United States. I take it because that would be seen as too much of a provocation to the Chinese. On the other hand, there have been reports that there would be maritime militia put out by your military militiamen deployed to the contested waters around Scarborough Shoal, Spratly Islands. Those seem like slightly opposite responses?
No, actually, what happened was there was this call to join military exercises around the area with the U.S. And there's a bit of pressure there, and he doesn't like that. So he said no. And the next thing you know, we're in Rimpak in Hawaii,
right,
with the U.S. Navy. So we do that. We just don't like to be told to do it. But we know that is our only military ally. Now, as for the militia, that's right. I suspect the other side would be tempted to say, well, the army the military has a mind of its own, and that's why you and I are friends. We get along well with each other, but sometimes these guys, they just do it. I said, so now we're going to be all over that place too. And when they come and harass each other, I'm going to say, well, the military has a mind of its own. So that people can play that game. The thing, though, is when it gets there. I do know that both superpowers are worried. Um, I'll tell you, when the Visiting Forces Agreement was first abrogated, I have since suspended the abrogation on the president's call. The military was for it. The U.S. is our only military ally. We train there, but we also have a VFA with Australia. And the thing with these Australians is I blame them because I wanted to continue the VFA. I argued for it in the Senate, but I was overruled by the president. Is that the Australian VFA is one that respects the feelings of our military better. It treats them better, more fairly, etc. I've tried to explain to our military men, hey, look, U.S. is a big country. It's full of people. Australia has a big continent, but it's few people, and maybe they can be more hospitable to you. It hasn't worked. Okay, so I think instead of just coming over and showing off the hardware, they might want to share the hardware with our soldiers. It's a hard argument when I sit there with all those combat generals. It's different if they were desk generals. And they say, we just watch, we just look at all that firepower. And we're just not given it. We just have no access to that. So I hope things will change. The Australian model is a very good one. So if the U.S. feels that feels aggrieved by this developments, perhaps they should talk to Australia and ask them, why are you doing that? You're making us look bad. So I told this to the ambassador, he died laughing. But
so maybe let's come now to your metaphor of the elephants. China and the United States being the elephants, and as you say, when they fight, they mess up the grass, and when they make love, well, I won't repeat it, but we don't have to talk about the elephants making love, because of course right now the elephants are fighting, and they're fighting in ways that really it's a serious thing. Of course, it's not a laughing matter, and it's as bad as it's been in some years. Can you help our audience to understand what the view from Manila is, and the damage that it does to your country, to the region, in terms of just the state of play as it is right now between the United States and China? Or maybe it isn't. Is it something that actually you can play to your advantage?
Yeah. It's actually not. But when I say when the elephants make love, it isn't a speculative thing that Lee Kuan Yew said, although he didn't see it happen. I did. The reason we lost the reef was that our Navy, one boat at that time, confronted the Chinese Navy, many boats. And they were about to clash, and the U.S. Under the Democratic administration said, stand down. What are you guys doing? So we stood down. And they said, withdraw. Our boat withdrew, the Chinese state. And basically, that administration said, oh, well, such is life. That was when there was great relations between China and the US. Since then, Trump came in, and something else has happened. And in this confrontation, I think as ants in the grass, a bit safer.
I'm sorry,
two great powers.
A bit safer, you said?
A bit safer in the sense that you don't have one dominating the other. As I said, we need the U.S. presence in Southeast Asia. We are, for example, negotiating a code of conduct, what happens in the South China Sea with China. But one of the demands is always, well, let's keep Western powers, non-regional powers out of it. No. I said, no, that's not in the cards. We can come up with rules on how we conduct our maritime, our ships, our shipping, our naval vessels, etc. Conduct themselves in the South China Sea, what to do, what not to do. If accidents happen, what are the recourse? But it's better to have the United States there. And I always say the United States. They always say, sometimes the tendency is to say Western powers. But I don't know about European powers. I'd rather depend on the United States. Mm-hmm. The Europeans have their own interests. And as you know, they're very closely linked with the Chinese economy as well. Oh, by the way, I just read something that came out. The German intelligence chief said China is out to dominate the world with its sophisticated technology, superb products. Jesus, there was a time when I thought a threat was to dominate the world with militaries, with navies, with air forces, with land armies. Now it's smarts in products. If it's gonna go down that road, I don't know if I'm gonna go down that road with them.
Well, that the German report is not the first, as I'm sure you know, to make that point. Mr. Secretary, let's maybe come back to where you began with the coronavirus. And I was struck by, I mean, most officials who come to this platform speak about, the experience they've had, as you did in mentioning the task force. But you and your president have both been very strong on a different point, which we don't hear so often, which is the question of when the vaccine, assuming it will come soon, and that there would be an equitable distribution of it. And you said it yourself. The president said, let us be clear on this. The COVID-19 vaccine must be considered a global public good. Your emphasis, both yours and President Duterte's, how worried are you that this may not be the case? That smaller countries, less well-to-do economically countries, may not have fair distribution, and what can you do about it?
One is I have faith in the better angels of everyone's nature, because it also makes sense, as I warned, that it's a reverse weapon of mass destruction. Deny it to anyone, it will be deep. The hurt and the revenge will be unending. I don't like to talk about threats, but I also know that this is one development, one product that I don't think any country is interested in using as a weapon, as leverage to put pressure on anyone. To begin with, even if all the countries find a vaccine, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure there are experts in the audience. I said, I don't think any of those countries would risk eternal ignominy by deploying it before it is completely tested within reasonable limits. There will always be some risk that it won't work or it's not suitable. But to the best of their ability, they will make sure it's safe. But even if you had all of them participating, we have 6 billion people on this planet. We have 110 million people in my country. It's going to take time to make it, to deploy it, So I don't think it's in anyone's interest. Maybe I'm naive, but I don't think anyone. And second, there are so many others offering it. I don't think it will ever be that scenario of what they call vaccine nationalism. I don't think it will ever come into play. This is not the one. What it's done though is it's cleaned up the act of big pharma.
Yeah. But I hope, sir, of course, that you are right, that there isn't a vaccine nationalism. But unfortunately, we're seeing a vaccine nationalism even before there's a vaccine in some places, right? And maybe I won't, but there is a little of it, it seems, in this country. There is certainly a little bit of it in Russia. But so help our audience maybe to understand what can a country the size of the Philippines, and of course there are many in that category, what can your country do to assure that there is that equity, or perhaps to put yourself, if not at the head of the line, at least in a fair place? We don't have too many recent precedents for this, right?
No. I think one thing is we continue with our health protocols, distancing, wearing masks, etc., as if there was no vaccine. All of us have to do that because it's going to take time to make and deploy it. I do know, for example, that, the United States, and I understand other countries, have already put up facilities to make the vaccine in mass once it's fully tried, developed, and tested. I was told by Mike Pompeo, says Pfizer, Moderna has got the plants going up already. And you know what? If it turns out that vaccine doesn't work, they'll take the loss, they'll take the hit. And
Mhm.
that's really, these are businessmen, and that's how they think. If we find it, we're ready to deploy it. I just don't see you, but you tell me, you're the ones with a broader and more searching look at the world, that there are cases like that. I don't see it. I don't see it. I can't imagine anyone risking what Morgenthau calls their prestige on something like that. I mean, I don't know, but certainly they will be the pariahs of the world.
No, I mean, we certainly are no experts, Secretary, but all I can say to that is we very regularly have had throughout this year public health officials on this platform. And it seems that it's in the last month or two that they have gone from, the things they have been saying for months about which countries have done well, which countries have not done well, and so forth, to looking forward. And they have the concern you do, which is to make sure that the vaccine deployment, if you will, is number one, safe, it's not premature, it's not used for political ends, and then ultimately that there is an equity there. And more than that, we don't know. Speaking of this country, we do have a couple of questions here that are just very basic questions that I assume you would not normally want to answer about the little thing called the U.S. election, which is amazingly only a week from tomorrow. After all this time, it seems like it's been going on forever. But let me just expand on those questions a little bit, because I'm struck by the fact that you and your president have both, without naming names certainly, you've said some things that could be construed as taking some shots at the Trump administration. And I'll just give you some examples. The president was very direct in calling for more resources for the World Health Organization. Trump administration is as you know, has very publicly cut funding for the WHO and criticized them. You said about COVID, only science can take us out of the darkness. Critics of Donald Trump would say that he should, and has not lived by that respect for science. And then President Duterte also said about climate change in his speech to the UN, we call on all parties, especially those who have not made good their commitment to fight climate change, to honor those, and so forth. So all of which makes me ask the question that some in our audience are asking: are you rooting for a Biden presidency?
As you said, I shouldn't say anything about that on that score, but I can tell you that the advent of Trump has reversed the situation in the South China Sea and Philippine security. Instead of what we used to hear, we're only interested in freedom of navigation under the previous administration. We are seeing shows of force. And as I told you, when I suspended the abrogation of the visiting forces agreement, it relieved all the protagonists, the major powers here in this area. So Trump, in foreign policy, there it is. I credit it to the fact that he's in the Republican Party.
Right. And
I could go, but I'll just get myself into trouble, because I can bring that story about the influence of the Republican Party on our history since 1972, all the way from there to the present.
Sure.
One day we'll sit down and talk about that.
Well, I bet not to belabor the point, and maybe we don't have to mention the names Biden or Trump, but on the one hand, I mean, even before my time at the Asia Society as a journalist, it seemed very often countries, almost no matter who was in office, there is sometimes a preference for the incumbent because you know the person, you know the people, and so forth. But again, I'm struck by the fact that on many of these global issues, support for science, support for some of the principal UN agencies, certainly on climate, which, as I'm well aware, affects a country like the Philippines more than others. So just in terms of policy, let's even say Donald Trump is reelected. Are there some things of that nature that you would like to see changed no matter who's in office?
I'll tell you. I'll just give you my experience. It's quite long. This is probably why I shouldn't take the vaccine, because I've been around too long. But in 1972, a martial law was declared. We had the biggest newspaper in the country, my family. Dad went to jail. They took the paper. It's a Republican, right? And then throughout martial law, where Carter comes in and he's there, they're denouncing human rights, but nothing happens. And then suddenly Reagan comes in, talk about ultra-right, and something happens. We decide to take matters in our own hands. We go out into the streets, we demonstrate, and under the Republicans, decisions are made. They see what's happening on the ground in the Philippines. They see there's a communist threat, and they see a woman who's willing to stand up, and then she doesn't call for a revolution. She says, I'm gonna go into an election with this president who controls almost everything except the will of my people. And when the results come out, they were rather ambivalent, half-half, almost half-half. And Reagan sends Philip Habib, and Philip Habib tells Cory Aquino and says, how long do you think you can keep this up, these demonstrations? And she says, 1 week, 1 month, 1 year, 10 years, until it all goes to pot. And he stands up and said, no one can change this woman's mind. She's the president. And that's it. You know, that decisiveness is what we notice in Republican administrations. I have nothing against Democratic administrations. I admire Clinton for his brains, but that's been our experience. Yeah. And then under Bush, with the old man Bush, we had great relations with James Baker and those people in charge. And then when his son comes in, again, we had great relations. They seem to have a nose for foreign policy.
Let's come back just for one more beat, if we could, on domestic policy. Although here, it's domestic for you, it's domestic for us, it's kind of a global thing. You had a phrase that I wrote down in your remarks, that commerce is in the ICU in the period of COVID. And that's a very profound statement that will ring true in many, many parts of the world. And it speaks to this balance that cities, states, countries, the world really has to strike between full lockdowns, as your country has had, and then the opening up. And then in some cases, the opening up leads to more problems. I noticed that just in the last period, I believe the Philippines is about to start allowing foreign nationals back in with greater regularity, and some Filipino travelers to leave without the antigen tests that they were requiring. How profound or limited is the opening up right now? And to what extent is it driven by the fact that you feel commerce has to get out of the ICU?
The Secretary of Trade, the National Economic Development Authority, they want to open up the economy. But the president really has this concern about infections and fatalities. I call it a local bias on his part, that he is always close to his constituents, and now he regards the entire country as his constituent. Whatever it is, it's there and it's real. But every time we try to relax it, which of course makes us worried that the infections will rise, in fact, the public does not go out. They don't go to the malls to jumpstart the small shops and everything out there. So the public itself is wary of going out. And I can tell you, it's not as smooth as that. When we have a lockdown, General Año, who's done it very well, very severe, no exceptions. I was asking for exceptions for construction, but he killed that. Fine. But then we saw the argument was made by the economists, open up. And we do that. We made that announcement, and then the local governments, in your case, state governments, will say no. And usually, I pity General Año and the other generals in charge of this, because they tell them to their faces, in 2 years, you guys are gone. In 2 years, re-elected.
Yeah.
that tension is there, and we in our expatriation of foreigners stranded here, we have met resistance from local governments, and it's there. I guess if I was mayor or governor, I would be acting like that. I look at it nationally, but they look at it from their point of view, which is local. All politics is local for them, literally.
Right, right. Maybe never more so. Mr. Secretary, you spoke about your meetings with Secretary Pompeo, Secretary of State here. We have a question which doesn't mention Trump or Biden, but just says, come the next inauguration in January for either man, if you, sir, or any Philippine representative has the opportunity to be in Washington to lobby either the same president or the new president, what are the main things you would ask for in the next 4 years from a United States administration?
Well, in the circumstances, we've gotten, I suppose, more military aid to build up our external defense. We're getting that, though, from Japan. Japan has been very proactive. We're getting it from Korea as well. They've given us two Navy ships already, firsthand. So perhaps the United States could chip in, because an external defense, a strong one, is probably the best, together with the U.S. Mutual Defense Treaty, is the best deterrent to any foolish actions in the South China Sea.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, I know that there are also opinions within the U.S. Defense and foreign policy establishment to say, you don't want to give those guys, the sort of hardware where they can get reckless and perhaps provoke something.
Right.
I've heard that before. I mean, when I started in government in the palace in 1986, we don't know. I remember when Mrs. Aquino was told by conservative American opinion, you're too soft on communists. And so she went to Washington and she sat with Weinberger and she said, and therefore I'm going to ask you, because I've tried the peace to be prepared in case the peace talks fail. She said, I'd like to ask you for 10 attack helicopters per region. And he says, how many regions do you have? 13. 130? He says, you think we have these things on a grocery shelf? My God, why don't you try peace talks instead? You know what I mean? That's where I come from. Perhaps things will change, but so far, it's almost half my life. That's what I've been getting. Go to war with the communists, and then, are you crazy? 130 attack helicopters? Try peace talks.
Right, right. But
I'm sure sooner or later.
So maybe let's spin the question from the viewer that I just asked you, and let's take it to Beijing. You also mentioned your counterpart in Beijing, Wang Yi, who has been there in that position longer than you've been in yours, I guess. As the calendar turns and we move to 2021, again, whatever's going on in Washington, what is your ask of the Chinese? I mean, I know what the big ask, but what's a reasonable ask that might actually get somewhere with the Chinese?
In order to let time pass, how about trying to keep your boats from colliding with ours, sinking fishing boats, and creating these incidents? That would help. So we can continue to talk for ways to cooperate around this issue. I told the head of the publisher or the editor of the Global Times, I believe that's the PLA newspaper.
Yes.
And he asked me to explain what the situation is. I said, the avenue of Philippine-China cooperation is really broad. I mean, it's a real highway. But right in the center of that is a pebble. That pebble is the reef that you took. And you know what? Going down that broad highway, we're going to stumble on that pebble. Mm-hmm. And everything's going to go to pot. This is so. Just that's basically my attitude with them, and they take it when they say. The one thing though that annoys me, but you guys are the experts here. You tell me if my answer is correct. So I insist it's ours. I insist on the arbitral award. I insist that you can't say the reef is really an ancient claim because you just reclaimed it 2 years ago. You know, you can't do that. And then China answers back and says, no, it's ours, etc. And there are critics in Manila who say, you can't let them say that. I said, what do you mean I can't let them say that? It's a free world. They can say what they want. I'm saying what I want, except I'm saying it with all the backing of international law. But they can say what they want. I'm not going to get angry over that. I'm going to get angry if they act on it.
Right.
That's reasonable.
Well, Mr. Secretary, I'm mindful of the time, but all of this reminds me, and I think it must be 4 years ago now, I had the privilege of meeting, I believe his name is Justice Carpio, who brought the case that we've been talking about and that led to this this ruling. And so I'm afraid on behalf of the Asia Society, we never take positions. So I would dodge your question just now, except to say that, you know, that conversation was, and the presentation he made, which still lives somewhere on our website, was for us very valuable, for our audience very valuable, and I guess was, you know, in a way a first draft of history because it hadn't yet been formally presented, and of course the ruling hadn't happened. My last question for you on your interesting and strong, powerful metaphor about the pebble on the highway. You said you gave that example to a journalist. Have you given that same metaphor to your Chinese counterpart?
I told it to the publisher of the military newspaper, and that got around. And
Yeah.
the report came out in the military newspaper about what I said. Yes, and this may be a vain hope, but I think that ever since that incident where the United States allowed China to take the reef, what happened when they started reclaiming that was that all the countries of Southeast Asia, which were open, of course, to Chinese generosity, suddenly had an excuse. I'm not saying that suddenly, you know, we're alarmed, but had an excuse to show alarm and say,
Right.
I don't care how much you give us. This is really what you're aiming for. It's been counterproductive. And I hope the time will come when China will realize that sandbar isn't worth all the loss of goodwill we've incurred since we made it, since we took it, reclaimed it. And that's my hope.
Yeah. Well, I hope it's not a vain hope, sir. And I want to say on behalf of our audience, on behalf of all my colleagues at the Asia Society, you have a great gift for candor and somehow even for some humor along the way, even though these aren't funny subjects. And we appreciate that. The time goes very quickly speaking with you. But I thank you. I wish you and your country well on all these fronts, particularly in the ongoing fight with the virus. And but mostly, I just want to say thank you, Salamat, for your time and your generosity. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Tom. Thank you.
Thank you.
Enjoyed it. Thank you.